The wind is screaming. Not a gentle breeze, not the kind of winter chill you know from home. No. This is a razor-sharp howl, a voice that cuts across miles of white emptiness. The continent itself seems to groan under the weight of ice. And you're standing here, in the last place on Earth that still hides more secrets than answers. Forget the travel brochures with smiling scientists and penguins waddling across postcard snow. That's the sanitized version. The real Antarctica doesn't care about you, doesn't want you here, and if it had a choice, it would happily bury you under 2 miles of ice and never mention your name again. And yet, for centuries, people have whispered about what lies beneath. Ancient maps drawn before telescopes and satellites somehow show outlines of this frozen land. Explorers vanished chasing mysteries here, while governments quietly launched expeditions that were bigger than some wars. Some say there are ruins, others say bases, and a few, the more entertaining ones, insist there's an entire civilization frozen in place, just waiting to wake up. The problem is, no one can check. Not you, not me, not the average person. Antarctica is locked up tighter than your neighbor's Wi-Fi. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 made sure of that. Scientists, governments, and military forces all have their hands on the key. You're left outside the gate, squinting into the white, told there's nothing to see here. Which, of course, is exactly when there's something to see. But let's rewind. Imagine a candlelit room in the early 1500s. A mapmaker leans over parchment, carefully inking coastlines of lands nobody in Europe should have known existed. His name was Pierre Rees, an Ottoman admiral with a talent for cartography and a strange source of knowledge. On his map, tucked along the edge of South America, is a coastline that looks suspiciously like Antarctica without ice. How could he possibly know? Official history tells you Antarctica wasn't even discovered until 1820. Yet here it is, sketched centuries earlier, its coast looking warmer, softer, alive. Coincidence? A mistake? Or did someone long before us sail along those shores and record what they saw? You can already feel the discomfort setting in. Because if that's true, it means someone mapped a continent we were told was impossible to reach. Someone saw Antarctica not as a wasteland, but as land. And that means either history is wrong, or we've been fed a version of it that leaves out entire civilizations. Of course, not everyone buys it. Modern historians love to wave their hands and say, "Relax, it's just a distorted South America." They'll roll their eyes and go back to grading papers. But still, the detail lingers. The Pierre Rees map isn't alone. Other maps, drawn centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered, seem to hint at knowledge we shouldn't have. And so you're left staring at the parchment, at the icy expanse beyond, at this silent continent that's been whispering to humanity for centuries. Look closer. Antarctica is more than a frozen desert. It's a vault. A locked chest of the Earth's memory, sealed under ice. And tonight, we're prying at the edges, peering into the dark, and asking the one question no government or scientist ever seems to answer. What's really hiding down there? You don't stumble into a mystery like this by accident. No one just wakes up one morning, yawns, and says, "Ah yes, today I'll question the entire history of human civilization by staring at a continent of ice." But here you are. Antarctica, the place you've never visited, never will, and yet somehow can't stop thinking about. It's the forbidden basement of Earth. Every other continent has been poked, prodded, explored, photographed, and strip-mined into submission. Antarctica? Still locked away. Still guarded. Still pretending to be just ice and penguins. Spoiler, it's not just ice and penguins. Tonight, we're peeling back the frozen curtain. You're going to hear about maps that should not exist, drawn by hands that supposedly had no way of knowing what they were depicting. You'll hear about expeditions, official, secret, and somewhere in between, that went south, both literally and metaphorically. You'll learn about things modern satellites have picked up under the ice, things nature isn't supposed to arrange on its own. And yes, you'll hear the counterarguments too. The polite, skeptical voices reminding you that extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, and that maybe, just maybe, we're all squinting too hard at snowdrifts. Fair enough. But if that's true, Why does Antarctica keep showing up in whispers, in myths, in classified documents, in feverish late-night theories shared in rooms where curtains are drawn shut? Here's the deal. If you came looking for certainty, you're not going to get it. This isn't the kind of story that ties itself up neatly with a bow. This is the kind of story that leaves you staring at your ceiling at 2 a.m., thinking about a frozen coastline that shouldn't be on a 500-year-old map. So, get comfortable. Really comfortable. Dim the lights, pull the blanket a little tighter, maybe make peace with the fact that the heater's not quite doing its job tonight. You're going to need the atmosphere. Because as the ice cracks and the wind moans, you'll notice something unsettling. This mystery doesn't just sit out there, thousands of miles away. It reaches for you. You'll picture yourself walking across that frozen expanse. Your boots crunching on powder, your breath freezing in the air. You'll feel the sting of cold in your lungs, the emptiness pressing in from all sides. And then, beneath it all, you'll start to imagine what's under your feet. Mountains. Rivers. Lakes sealed off for millions of years. Structures, maybe. Shapes that shouldn't exist. Histories we weren't supposed to inherit. Because Antarctica isn't just a continent. It's a mirror. What you see in it depends on how much of the official story you're willing to accept, and how much of the forbidden one you're brave enough to entertain. So, welcome. Tonight, you'll travel through the strange, unsettling history of Antarctica, from the parchment maps of long-dead sailors to the classified reports of governments who swore they found nothing. You'll sift through rumors of Nazi fortresses, Cold War military campaigns disguised as research, and satellite scans that tease us with impossible geometry beneath the ice. And as always, you'll have to decide what you believe. Because that's the fun part, isn't it? The authorities give you one version. The myths whisper another. And somewhere in between those two extremes, the truth is sitting there, buried under 2 miles of ice, waiting. So, dim the lights. Breathe slow. And remember, Antarctica has been quiet for millions of years. But silence doesn't always mean nothing is there. Sometimes, silence means someone doesn't want you to hear the noise. Officially, Antarctica is boring. At least, that's what you've been told. A frozen wasteland, larger than Europe, covered in a sheet of ice so thick it could swallow mountains whole. No trees. No cities. Just endless white stretching in every direction, as if the planet ran out of ideas and decided to give up decorating. Science tells you the ice has been here for millions of years, sealing the continent in a deep freeze since long before humans figured out how to bang rocks together. It's a lifeless vault, a cold, sterile place where only penguins and a few deranged scientists choose to exist. And the official story loves to emphasize just how empty it is. Uninhabited. Inhospitable. Unimportant. 3 words that, if you know anything about history, usually mean the exact opposite. Because here's the thing, places declared empty are rarely truly empty. They're just places someone powerful doesn't want you to look too closely at. But let's play along. Pretend for a moment you're a researcher at a polar station. Your day starts in a prefab metal hut that rattles every time the wind decides to remind you who's in charge. Step outside, and the air bites your face like sandpaper dipped in liquid nitrogen. The horizon is flat, endless, and colorless, broken only by mountains so ancient and worn down they look like the bones of the earth itself. And yet, beneath all that ice, scientists admit there's a hidden landscape. They've detected rivers flowing in total darkness, lakes sealed away for millions of years, and mountain ranges as tall as the Alps. Antarctica isn't a blank canvas. It's a painting with every layer smudged over in white. You're told the top layer is all that matters, but you can feel something underneath, pressing back. Of course, the official narrative always circles back to the same refrain. There's nothing to see here. No ruins. No civilizations. No secrets. Just rock, ice, and unfortunate penguins. That's it. End of story. And maybe that would be convincing, if the continent wasn't locked down by one of the most unusual agreements in history. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959. Signed by over a dozen nations at the height of the Cold War, it essentially declared the entire continent off-limits to anything except peaceful science. Which sounds wholesome, right? Like a global pact to protect the penguins. Except, Step back for a second and think about it. The US and the Soviet Union couldn't agree on lunch during the Cold War. They bickered over everything, armed themselves to the teeth, and circled the globe with nuclear weapons. But when it came to Antarctica, suddenly, best friends. No arguments. No disputes. Just instant agreement to keep it untouched, unmined, uninhabited, forever. Doesn't that feel a little too neat? It's like two kids fighting over every toy in the room, but both refusing to touch the locked chest in the corner. Not because they're polite, but because they already know what's inside, and they don't want anyone else to have it. So the official story stays in place. Antarctica is just ice. Scientists live in little huts, drill ice cores, measure penguin poop, and definitely don't stumble across anything they aren't supposed to. And if they do, well, you probably won't hear about it. Because that's the beauty of Antarctica. You'll never go there. 99% of humans will never set foot on its ice. Which means the story you get, the official story, doesn't have to convince everyone. It only has to be told with enough authority that you never think to question it. But people have been questioning. For centuries. From strange maps drawn before the age of satellites to whispered tales of expeditions that went far beyond science, Antarctica refuses to stay boring. And that's where our story begins to split. On one side, the official version. Empty. Cold. Lifeless. On the other, something older, stranger, and far less convenient. So which story do you want to believe? Picture yourself in the year 1513. Europe is still stumbling through the age of exploration, half drunk on rumors of new worlds. Sailors are circling the globe with ships that leak more than they float. And in the Ottoman Empire, an admiral named Pyri Reis is hunched over a sheet of gazelle skin, carefully drawing coastlines he shouldn't know exist. The map he creates is a strange puzzle. It shows parts of South America with surprising accuracy, not bad for a time when most people still thought sea monsters lived just past the horizon. But the real shock is what appears along the bottom edge. A coastline. Jagged. A shape that, to modern eyes, looks eerily like Antarctica without ice. This is where things get awkward. Because according to official history, Antarctica wasn't even sighted until 1820, over 300 years later. And according to geology, the continent has been locked under ice for millions of years. Yet here it is, traced on a map in the early 16th century, like someone had been sailing along its shores not long before. So how does Pyri explain it? He claimed his map wasn't original. He copied it from older charts, some going back to Alexander the Great, others allegedly drawn by civilizations even older. In other words, he was compiling fragments of knowledge handed down from long-forgotten sources. Knowledge that, inconveniently, included coastlines no one was supposed to have seen. Now, if you were holding this map in your hands, squinting at the faded ink, you'd probably have two thoughts. First, this looks suspiciously like Antarctica. Second, how on earth would they know what it looked like? And this is where the theories start to spiral. One camp says it's simple. The map shows Antarctica before it was covered in ice, which would mean someone mapped it thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of years ago. That implies a seafaring civilization capable of global navigation long before ours. The kind of civilization history politely pretends never existed. Another camp, the skeptics, says, relax. It's not Antarctica at all. It's just a distorted drawing of South America. A cartographic hiccup, nothing more. Which sounds reasonable until you remember that ancient mapmakers had no trouble misplacing continents the size of Australia, so why would they accidentally draw a strangely accurate Antarctic coastline at the bottom of the page? It's like finding a doodle in your grandpa's old notebook that looks exactly like a smartphone. Sure, maybe it's coincidence. Or maybe he knew something you didn't. But let's go darker for a second. If the Pyri Reis map really does show Antarctica ice-free, that means two possibilities. 1. Humans have been around far longer and far more advanced than we like to admit. 2. The ice hasn't always been here. Maybe it melted more recently than we thought. Maybe it shifted, suddenly, catastrophically. And if it happened before, it can happen again. The funny thing? Pyri himself probably didn't think twice about it. For him, it was just a patchwork of old charts, stitched together with ink and guesswork. For us, it's a riddle carved into parchment, taunting us with details that don't fit neatly into the story we've been told. And this isn't the only one. Later maps, drawn by other hands, also hint at knowledge of Antarctica long before it was discovered. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If multiple cartographers were pulling from the same mysterious sources, then who exactly had been mapping the edges of our world in the distant past? That's the unsettling beauty of the Piri Reis map. It doesn't scream at you. It whispers. A faint coastline, a curve that shouldn't be there, a shadow of a land we weren't supposed to see. It's the kind of whisper that makes you lean closer, then wonder if you really want to know what comes next. Because every map is more than just a drawing. It's a memory. And this one remembers something we've all apparently forgotten. The Piri Reis map isn't lonely. It has company, and that's where things get uncomfortable. Because if there were just one strange map, you could brush it off. The fluke. A mistake. Some cartographer sneezed and accidentally drew an extra continent. But when multiple maps, from different times and places, start hinting at the same impossible thing, that's when you start to wonder who exactly was passing these secrets around. Take the Orontius Phineas map, drawn in 1531. A French cartographer, working with scraps of knowledge gathered from who knows where, produces a world map that casually shows a southern continent. And not just a vague blob either. He sketched rivers, mountain ranges, a shape that looks suspiciously like Antarctica, except without the blanket of ice. The coastlines align uncannily well with modern maps made by satellites peering through 2 miles of frozen cover. Then there's Philippe Watch in the 1700s. His map divides Antarctica into 2 distinct landmasses, separated by a waterway. At the time, this looked like pure fantasy. But fast forward to the 20th century, when radar scans of the continent revealed, you guessed it, Antarctica is indeed split by a vast subglacial trench. Watch was centuries early to the discovery. Either he was the luckiest guesser in history, or he had access to sources nobody likes to talk about. And here's the kicker. These mapmakers weren't lone visionaries scribbling nonsense in a basement. They were respected. They held positions of authority. Their maps were meant for navigation, trade, and the serious business of empire. Which makes it awkward when their work appears to contain details science insists they shouldn't have known. Now, skeptics will shake their heads. You're overthinking it. Ancient cartographers copied each other, added artistic flourishes, filled in blanks with imagination. Fair enough. But explain this. Why does their imagination keep lining up with facts we only confirmed centuries later, using planes, satellites, and ice-penetrating radar? It's like someone in the 18th century drawing a picture of Mars with canyons and polar ice caps, details we wouldn't see until spacecraft arrived. If it happened once, maybe coincidence. But when it happens over and over, it feels less like chance and more like memory. And memory is dangerous. It suggests continuity. It suggests that somewhere, somehow, knowledge survived from a time when Antarctica wasn't buried alive. Knowledge that slipped into the hands of Renaissance cartographers like whispers carried on the wind. Of course, mainstream history does its best to keep this quiet. You'll hear phrases like misinterpretation, projection errors, or artistic liberties, which is a polite way of saying, please don't ask too many questions. Because if you tug at that thread too hard, the whole fabric starts to unravel. And suddenly, you're staring at the possibility that civilization is much older, much stranger, and much more forgetful than we'd like to admit. But here's the uncomfortable part. Maps don't just show coastlines. They show intent. Purpose. If someone charted Antarctica ice-free, it means they were there. They saw it. Which means they sailed farther, lived longer, and achieved more than our textbooks give them credit for. And that leaves you standing here, staring at old parchment, trying to decide what to believe. Were these just lucky guesses, scribbles on faded vellum? Or were they fragments of a story too big to fit neatly into the narrative we've been handed? Maps are supposed to tell us where we are. These ones tell us something else, where we've been. And maybe, if you listen closely, where we're heading. Because Antarctica has always been there, waiting. It doesn't care if you ignore it. The ice keeps its secrets well. But every now and then, in the ink stains of forgotten cartographers, it whispers just loud enough to remind you, the past is not as frozen as you think. So, let's say the skeptics are wrong. Let's say those old maps really do show Antarctica, back when it wasn't wearing its ice mask. That raises a deeply awkward question. Who exactly was sailing down there to make them? The official answer? No one. Because according to history, humans were still fumbling through early navigation. We were losing ships to storms, clinging to coastlines, and arguing about whether or not sea monsters counted as valid reasons to turn the boat around. The idea of advanced seafarers charting Antarctica thousands of years ago doesn't just sound unlikely, it sounds impossible. But here's the thing about impossible. History is full of it. Flying was impossible until it wasn't. Splitting atoms was impossible until it wasn't. And civilizations building stone monuments that still baffle modern engineers? Those were supposedly impossible too. And yet, you can still walk around them, touch them, feel the unsettling weight of proof pressing down on you. So imagine this. Antarctica, not the frozen desert you know, but a green land, fringed with forests, teeming with rivers and animals. A place where ships could dock. Where settlements could rise. Where cultures could thrive. It's not fantasy. Geology admits the continent was once warm, lush, habitable. The only debate is when. Now picture a forgotten civilization, one with the tools, the ships, maybe even the arrogance to map the world. They sail down, chart the coastlines, leave behind records that somehow, against all odds, drift forward through history. Fragments land in the hands of Renaissance cartographers long after the civilization itself has vanished. And you? You're left holding the scraps, trying to piece together a story that refuses to sit neatly inside the lines you were taught at school. Of course, mainstream scholars wave this off. Lost civilizations? Too fringe. Too pseudo. They'll tell you human society is a neat, upward climb. Cavemen, agriculture, pyramids, the internet. Straightforward, tidy, no missing chapters. Which would be comforting if it weren't so obviously wrong. Cultures collapse. Knowledge disappears. Libraries burn. And every so often, an inconvenient artifact pops up and ruins the timeline. The maps are one such artifact. They whisper about people we don't want to admit existed. People smart enough to cross oceans before the age of compasses. People who saw Antarctica before it froze. People who are now nothing more than shadows and myths. And here's where the irony cuts in. We laugh at legends. Atlantis, Lemuria, Mu. Children's stories were told. Fiction. And yet, every time we dig deeper into the earth, we find reminders that myths often grow from something real. Troy was once a myth until archaeologists unearthed its walls. Could Antarctica be hiding the same kind of inconvenient truth? Picture it. Beneath the ice, remnants of structures. Carved stones, aligned just so. Not natural formations, but deliberate. Built by hands that aren't supposed to exist in that time. Maybe they're there still, preserved like a time capsule under miles of frozen silence. Waiting for the ice to give way, or for someone brave, or foolish, enough to go looking. It's almost poetic. The most inhospitable place on Earth might be the archive of its oldest story. A civilization erased, not by enemies or disasters, but by the slow suffocation of ice. Of course, officially, you'll never hear this theory in a classroom. It's too messy, too threatening. Because if Antarctica was once home to a forgotten culture, then history isn't a ladder. It's a spiral, climbing, collapsing, and climbing again. Which means we're not as special or as safe as we like to think. So as you stand on that frozen shore in your imagination, the wind cutting through you, remember this. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and ice remembers everything. The question is, how much of that memory are we allowed to see? Because of course, if there's a mystery, the Nazis have to show up eventually. It's like a historical law. Ancient relic? Nazis. Secret bases? Nazis. Lost civilizations under the ice? Well, who else? The year is 1938. Germany launches an expedition to Antarctica. Officially, it's about securing whaling grounds and expanding territory. Unofficially, it has been the spark for decades of rumors. The mission was called Neuschwabenland, named after a region in Germany, and it sailed south with scientists, surveyors, and, naturally, military officers. They dropped flags, flew over the ice, and mapped areas that had barely been touched before. So far, nothing suspicious. Just imperial posturing in the cold. But the story doesn't end there. Because in the years that followed, whispers began that the Nazis weren't just mapping coastlines. They were building bases. Establishing hidden fortresses carved into ice caves. Searching for entrances to something beneath the continent. Some even claim they were chasing the idea of hollow Earth, believing Antarctica was a gateway into a hidden inner world. Now, is that likely? Is it absurd? Absolutely. But absurd is kind of the Nazis' brand. And the rumors only multiplied after the war. You'll hear claims of U-boats fleeing to Antarctica as Germany collapsed in 1945, carrying scientists, treasure, maybe even strange technology. Entire convoys supposedly vanishing into the white silence, leaving no trace. Some theorists go further, suggesting the Nazis found something under the ice, something ancient, something they wanted to exploit. What makes this harder to dismiss is the timing. Just a few years after the war, in 1946, the United States launched Operation High Jump, a massive Antarctic expedition involving over 4,000 men, warships, and aircraft. Officially, it was a training exercise. Unofficially? Well, the scale was bizarre for a continent of penguins and snowdrifts. And here's where the conspiracy fuel gets thrown on the fire. Some accounts claim Operation High Jump ended abruptly, months before it was scheduled to. Rumors say they encountered resistance, strange aircraft, battles under the ice sky, encounters the official reports politely forgot to mention. Mainstream historians scoff at this, of course. But the whispers linger. Because that's what Antarctica does. It doesn't shout its secrets. It whispers them, just enough to keep you awake at night. Now, let's be clear. Most likely, the Nazis weren't flying UFOs around Antarctica. Most likely, they were just desperate men planting flags and fantasizing about empire in the least hospitable place on Earth. But the fact remains, they went there. They looked. They invested time and resources into a continent the rest of the world largely ignored. And that leaves you with a question. If Antarctica is just ice, if it's truly as barren and pointless as we're told, why did a regime on the brink of war bother sending an expedition there at all? Why spend precious resources on frozen wasteland when Europe was about to explode? Maybe it was just vanity. Maybe it was just about securing whaling rights. Or maybe, and this is where the unease creeps in, maybe they thought they'd found something worth the risk. Picture it, German ships breaking through the pack ice. Men unloading supplies into caves warmed by hidden volcanic vents. Plans being drawn up, experiments carried out, ambitions stretching deep into the frozen silence. A seed planted in a place no one else dared to claim. And then imagine what's left behind when that seed is abandoned. Equipment, records, maybe more. Frozen in place, waiting. The Nazis lost the war, but their shadow lingers. And in Antarctica, that shadow feels darker, heavier. Because if anyone was reckless enough to go digging for forbidden things in the ice, it was them. So yes, the Nazis made their mark here too. And if even a fraction of the rumors are true, they weren't the first to uncover secrets under the ice. They were just the latest fools to think they could control them. If you ever wanted proof that Antarctica is not as boring as the official story claims, here it is, Operation High Jump. The year is 1946. The war is over, cities lie in ruins, and most of the world is still trying to stitch itself back together. And yet, the United States decides this is the perfect moment to send one of the largest military expeditions in history to Antarctica. Officially, it was a training mission. That's the phrase they use. Nice, harmless, like a Boy Scout field trip with battleships. But let's break it down. Admiral Richard Byrd, a seasoned explorer, leads a fleet of 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and over 4,000 men. 4,000. To study penguins? To practice camping in the cold? That's not training. That's an invasion. Imagine the logistics. Warships cutting through the ice, planes flying reconnaissance, men setting up bases with the precision of a military campaign. The whole thing lasted only a few months, but the scale was staggering. And here's the strange part. It ended abruptly. Supposedly, they planned to stay 6 months, but after just 8 weeks, they packed up and left. The official story says bad weather and equipment issues. Which sounds reasonable, until you remember this was the US Navy. They just fought through the Pacific. They weren't scared of a little frostbite. Something doesn't add up. And that's where the rumors flood in. Whispers of strange encounters. Reports of aircraft that didn't behave like anything known at the time. Saucer-shaped, fast, darting in and out of clouds. Some say there were skirmishes, even losses. That men and planes didn't come back. Official documents, of course, say nothing. But Admiral Byrd himself gave a cryptic interview afterward, warning that the United States must prepare to face aircraft capable of flying pole to pole at incredible speeds. That's a peculiar thing to say after what was supposedly just a training exercise. Of course, skeptics argue he was talking about the Soviets, not aliens, not ancient civilizations under the ice. But still, why Antarctica? Why there, and why then? Here's the unsettling thought. Maybe Operation High Jump wasn't just about training. Maybe it was reconnaissance. Maybe the US had caught wind of Nazi activity under the ice, bases, research, something left behind. And maybe they went to check it out, to make sure no one else had their hands on it. Picture yourself as one of those 4,000 men. You're standing on the deck of a ship, breath freezing, staring at the endless wall of white. You've just survived a world war, and now you're here, in a place no one cares about, supposedly for training. But your gut says otherwise. The tension in the officers' voices. The secrecy. The sense that you're not being told the whole story. And then something happens. Maybe it's just a storm that comes out of nowhere. Maybe it's something else, something flying overhead that you don't recognize, moving in ways planes shouldn't. You never get answers. Only orders. Pack it up. Go home. Forget. The expedition leaves. Files are written, sanitized, filed away. And all that remains are fragments, Byrd's cryptic warning, rumors of lost aircraft, stories whispered by men who couldn't keep quiet. What's certain is this. Operation High Jump was real. Massive. Strange. And abruptly cut short. Whether it was bad weather, Soviet paranoia, or something stranger, we'll probably never know. But it fits a pattern, doesn't it? Every time Antarctica threatens to reveal too much, the story gets buried under ice, excuses, and silence. And you're left with the uncomfortable feeling that the world's last frontier isn't empty. It's guarded. The Cold War. A time when paranoia was the only thing hotter than the nuclear warheads everyone was pretending they didn't want to use. And in the middle of that global staring contest, Antarctica somehow slips into the picture. A frozen wasteland, far from the missiles and spies, yet always lurking in the background like an uninvited guest. After Operation High Jump, you'd think the US Navy had gotten enough of the cold. But no. Less than a decade later, expeditions returned, this time draped in the language of science. Weather stations, geology studies, penguin counts, all very wholesome. At least on paper. But when you peel back the surface, you notice something. Militaries stayed very interested. They kept the ships, the planes, the logistics. They just changed the vocabulary. It's a clever trick. Call it research, and suddenly you're not marching an army into the ice, you're advancing human knowledge. And in the 1950s, both the US and the Soviet Union wanted a piece of that. Not for the penguins. For the secrets. See, Antarctica became more than just an empty continent. It became a stage. A place where you could quietly test equipment, conduct surveillance, maybe even stumble across whatever scraps the Nazis left behind. Remote, inhospitable, and conveniently far away from nosy civilians. Perfect. Then there's the Antarctic Treaty of 1959. A strange little document, signed by a dozen nations, declaring that Antarctica would forever be devoted to peace and science. No military activity. No territorial claims. Just cooperation. It sounds noble. Almost too noble. Think about it. In the middle of the Cold War, when nations could barely agree on how to breathe near each other, they all suddenly agreed Antarctica should be off-limits. Just like that. No arguments. No wars. A handshake and silence. That's suspicious. Imagine you're living in that era. The US and Soviets are glaring at each other across Berlin, stockpiling bombs, staging proxy wars on every continent. And yet, when it comes to Antarctica, they nod politely and say, "No, after you. We'll all share." Really? Or did they know something worth keeping quiet about? Some theories suggest the treaty was less about cooperation and more about containment. Keep ordinary nations, corporations, and curious explorers out. Limit access. Make sure only a select few know what really lies beneath the ice. And the rest of us? Distracted with Cold War drama, never realizing the strangest chapter was unfolding thousands of miles away, in silence. Picture yourself again, but this time in the 1960s. You're not a sailor now, but a scientist, flown in under the bright banner of international research. You're there to study ice cores, or so you're told. But maybe your base commander quietly asks you not to wander too far. Maybe the maps you're given don't quite line up with the terrain. Maybe a colleague disappears for weeks on a classified project, then returns looking pale, older somehow, and refuses to talk. And you start to wonder, what exactly is being researched down here? Is it really weather balloons and penguin migration patterns? Or something hidden, something ancient, buried deeper than your drills can reach? The Cold War loved its secrets, and Antarctica was the perfect freezer to keep them in. And so the continent slipped further into the shadows. No battles. No public drama. Just treaties, bases, and the occasional whisper of something too strange to print. To this day, the treaty still holds. Nations that can't agree on anything else still nod solemnly about Antarctica, which is either a beautiful story of unity or the longest-running cover-up in history. Spoiler, probably both. Here's a fun fact. Antarctica is the only continent on Earth without a McDonald's. No golden arches. No Starbucks. No theme parks. No Visit Antarctica resorts. And it's not because no one wants to cash in on it. It's because they're not allowed to. The reason? The Antarctic Treaty. Signed in 1959, in the middle of the Cold War, when the US and the Soviet Union couldn't agree on how to breathe the same air, and yet, somehow, they managed to agree that Antarctica should be left alone. Strange, isn't it? The treaty is sold as a triumph of cooperation. No military presence. No mining. No nuclear tests. Just peace and science. It sounds wholesome, like a campfire sing-along for nations that usually stab each other in the back. But if you dig into the fine print, the whole thing feels off. For starters, who actually enforces this treaty? Theoretically, everyone. Which means no one. You can't build a shack in your backyard without paperwork, but entire governments agreed that an entire continent would remain pristine and untouched. That's not how humans work. And then there's the speed of it. Normally, international agreements drag on for years, decades even, with endless squabbles. But the Antarctic Treaty was signed and sealed in record time. Almost like there was a sense of urgency. Like they had to lock Antarctica down before anyone asked too many questions. Now, imagine yourself in 1959. The newspapers are full of nuclear arms races, space races, proxy wars. Tension everywhere. And then you read a quiet little story about nations suddenly agreeing that Antarctica is off-limits forever. You'd probably shrug. Who cares? It's just ice. But that's the genius of it. Hide the most important agreement of the century under a blanket of snow and penguins, and no one notices. The treaty bans military activity, but scientific research is allowed. Which is convenient, because science makes the perfect cover. Weather studies, geology surveys, penguin counts, all fine. But if someone wanted to dig deeper, say into something not meant for public eyes, all they'd have to do is slap a research label on it. And the access is tightly controlled. You, as a normal citizen, cannot just hop on a boat and start drilling holes in the ice. You can't build, you can't mine, You can't even plant a flag and call it yours. Every inch is spoken for, regulated, restricted. It's the world's largest do not enter sign. Which raises the obvious question, what are they protecting? Some say it's about resources. Oil, minerals, rare earth metals. Keep the continent untouched until it's really needed. That's the boring answer. The less boring answer? They're protecting us from what's under the ice. Or maybe they're protecting it from us. Because the treaty isn't temporary. It's not, let's pause and think about this. It's open-ended, renewed automatically, enforced indefinitely. Which means someone, somewhere, decided Antarctica should stay sealed, forever. Picture yourself again, standing on the edge of the continent. Behind you, the roaring sea. In front of you, the endless wall of white. You want to walk inland, to see what's hidden. But you can't. Not because of nature, but because of paperwork. Invisible chains, wrapped around the land by people who swore they hated each other but somehow agreed on this one thing. And you're supposed to believe it's just about penguins. So next time someone tells you the Antarctic Treaty is a shining example of international cooperation, remember this. Humans don't cooperate unless they have to. And if the most secretive, paranoid nations in history agreed overnight to lock down the coldest, emptiest continent on Earth, well, maybe it's not empty after all. For centuries, Antarctica was safe from prying eyes. Too cold, too remote, too deadly. If you wanted to hide something, the ice was your best accomplice. But then came the satellites. Little metal spies orbiting overhead, snapping photos of every crack and crevice. And suddenly, Antarctica had nowhere left to hide. At least that's what we're told. In the 1970s and 80s, the first detailed satellite images of the continent appeared. White, endless, featureless. Or so it seemed. Because every so often, an image slipped through that didn't quite fit. Strange shapes. Geometric patterns. Shadows that didn't look like ice. And in the age before Photoshop, people started to ask questions. Fast forward to today, and the satellites are sharper, the sensors more advanced. Infrared, radar, thermal imaging. Tools that can peer through miles of ice, sketching the ghost of what lies beneath. And what they reveal isn't empty. Far from it. Mountains buried under glaciers. Lakes sealed away for millions of years. Entire river systems flowing in darkness. Antarctica isn't a barren desert. It's a continent alive with hidden landscapes. Landscapes we're not supposed to see. Now, every so often, a curious civilian digs through open-source satellite feeds, the ones NASA or Google Earth leave lying around. And what do they find? Things that shouldn't be there. A perfectly circular opening in the ice. A ridge that looks suspiciously like the edge of a buried structure. Straight lines where only chaos should exist. Of course, the explanations come fast. It's just ice cracking. It's a glitch in the imagery. It's pareidolia, your brain making patterns where none exist. Maybe. Or maybe the ice isn't the only thing covering up. And then there are the images that vanish. A strange anomaly spotted one week, blurred out the next. A black box slapped over a section of land, as if someone realized too late that the public wasn't supposed to see it. If Antarctica is just ice and penguins, why censor anything? Why redact a desert? Picture yourself at home, late at night, scrolling through Google Earth. You zoom in on Antarctica, the icy void. Your eyes blur from all the white. And then, something odd. A shape. Too clean, too deliberate. You lean closer, take a screenshot, maybe even post it online. But when you check again, it's gone. Coincidence? Or cleanup? And let's not forget the scientists themselves. Many have admitted that radar scans reveal structures under the ice that look like cities. Not igloos, not caves, cities. Grids, walls, patterns that nature doesn't usually bother with. Officially, these are natural formations. Convenient, isn't it? Because nature is always the scapegoat when the truth gets too weird. Here's the irony. Satellites were meant to reveal everything. Instead, they've revealed just enough to raise questions, and then slammed the door shut. A game of peekaboo with the most forbidden continent on Earth. So, what do we really know? That Antarctica isn't empty. That beneath 2 miles of ice, there are secrets, mountains, rivers, maybe ruins. That satellites sometimes catch glimpses of things we're not supposed to notice. And that whenever we get too close, the images vanish, blurred into digital snow. The ice was always a cover. The satellites were supposed to tear that cover away. Instead, they just made the mystery sharper, darker, harder to ignore. And you're left staring at the glowing screen, wondering, if this is what slips through by accident, what do they have locked away that we'll never see? Ice is a liar. On the surface, it tells you nothing. Just white, endless, dead. But underneath? That's where the truth waits. Over the last few decades, scientists have used radar to peer through Antarctica's frozen armor. And what they've found is unsettling. Because beneath those 2 miles of silence, the continent isn't barren at all. It's alive. Let's start with the lakes. Not little puddles, but vast bodies of water sealed away for millions of years. The most famous is Lake Vostok, a stretch of liquid hidden beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice. Bigger than some countries. Completely cut off from sunlight, from the atmosphere, from the world we know. And yet, there's life in it. Microbes. Bacteria that shouldn't be there, shouldn't even be possible in that kind of prison. Think about that. Life, thriving in total isolation. If it can happen there, why not anywhere? Suddenly Antarctica feels less like a dead end and more like a rehearsal space for stranger things. But lakes are just the beginning. Radar scans have revealed mountains, valleys, and entire river systems hidden under the ice. Landscapes that look eerily familiar, like the blueprint of another world. Scientists call it the Gamburtsev Range, a mountain chain the size of the Alps, buried alive. How do mountains that big just disappear? Simple. They didn't. We just covered them up. And then there's the question no one likes to linger on. What else might be hiding there? If microbes can survive in sealed lakes, if mountains can hide under ice for eons, what about ruins? Structures? Traces of civilizations erased not by time, but by glaciers? Officially, that's fantasy. Unofficially, well, the radar scans have picked up some suspicious patterns. Straight lines. Grids. Shapes that don't belong to geology. And every time those results leak out, they're dismissed, hushed, buried almost as quickly as the things they describe. Picture yourself standing on the ice. It creaks beneath your boots, groans like something alive. You know that under your feet, not far below, lies a lake older than humanity. A world sealed off, untouched, dark. You drill a hole, drop a probe, and wait. And maybe it sends back images that make your stomach knot. Maybe it sees movement in the black water. Or worse, something built. Something waiting. But let's keep it simple. Even without the ruins, the subglacial world is enough to make you question everything. Antarctica isn't static. It shifts, it moves, it hides rivers that flow in darkness, mountains that rise unseen, valleys that no human eye has looked upon. A second Earth, concealed under ice. And here's the part that gnaws at you. If this is what they admit to, what aren't they admitting? If scientists casually drop that, oh yes, there's a mountain range the size of the Alps down there, what else is sealed away, carefully redacted, scrubbed from reports? The truth is, we don't know. And maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe the silence, the treaties, the blurs on satellite maps, maybe they're not about protecting Antarctica from us. Maybe they're about protecting us from Antarctica. Because once you start peeling back that ice, the neat timeline of history starts to unravel. Suddenly, civilization doesn't look so unique. Suddenly, Earth feels bigger, older, stranger. And humans look smaller. Much, much smaller. So when you think of Antarctica, don't think of empty snow. Think of the silence beneath. Lakes where sunlight has never touched. Mountains that no one remembers. Rivers flowing under miles of frozen weight. And maybe, just maybe, something else. Something still holding its breath, waiting for the ice to crack. Here's where the ice stops being just ice and starts looking like a curtain. A curtain hiding something we're not meant to see. For decades, whispers have circulated about structures beneath Antarctica. Not mountains. Not ice ridges. But things with angles. Grids. Symmetry. The kind of order nature doesn't usually bother with. And every so often, a blurry satellite photo or leaked radar scan adds fuel to the fire. Take those infamous images of supposed pyramids. Triangular peaks rising out of the ice, sharp, geometric, suspiciously tidy. Geologists rush in to explain, they're just nunataks, mountain peaks poking through the glaciers. And maybe they are. But if they were in Egypt, you wouldn't hesitate to call them pyramids. Location, it seems, decides what counts as history and what gets waved away as coincidence. Then there are the stories of radar surveys that revealed grids under the ice. Perfect, repeating patterns like streets or foundations. Of course, those results don't stay public for long. A paper mentions them, then vanishes. A researcher hints at something, then stops talking. It's almost as if the ice doesn't just bury structures, it buries the truth too. Picture yourself walking across the frozen plateau. Nothing but white in every direction. The wind howls, your breath stings. And then, out of the haze, you see it. A ridge that looks too clean. Too deliberate. You brush the snow away, and beneath your glove is stone. Carved. Aligned. A corner where no corner should be. That's the image that keeps people awake at night. Because if there are structures under Antarctica, the implications are staggering. It means someone was here before us. Long before us. And they weren't just surviving, they were building. Of course, mainstream science laughs. Lost civilizations? Ancient builders in Antarctica? Too fringe, too messy. And yet, archaeology is littered with examples of things once dismissed as fantasy. The city of Troy. The ruins of Göbekli Tepe. Myths turn to stone when someone finally bothered to dig. And maybe that's the real problem. Digging. In Antarctica, you can't. The ice makes sure of that. Miles of frozen weight, pressing down like a secret no one is allowed to open. Convenient, isn't it? Still, the rumors persist. Leaked testimonies from military personnel talk about operations to investigate anomalies under the ice. Strange heat signatures. Buried voids that shouldn't exist. Some whisper that entire caverns have been found, warm enough to explore, big enough to hide cities. Others claim wreckage has been spotted, not human wreckage. Something older. Stranger. Now, whether you believe that or not, the idea itself gnaws at you. Because nature makes chaos. Jagged peaks, random lines, messy formations. When you start seeing order, triangles, grids, patterns, you can't unsee them. And you start to wonder, is the ice just covering the past, or is it preserving it? Imagine what could be waiting down there. Carved halls, frozen in time. Monuments swallowed by glaciers, their builders long gone. Or maybe not gone at all, just hidden, buried deeper than our shovels can reach. A civilization erased, not by conquest, but by climate. Locked in ice like a fly in amber. And here's the quiet irony, we may already know the answer. Maybe the scans have already shown what lies beneath. Maybe governments, treaties, and scientific secrecy exist not to keep us from asking, but to keep us from knowing. Because if Antarctica does hold structures, ruins, proof of a lost chapter in human history, the timeline collapses. The story we've been told, the one where civilization begins neatly in Mesopotamia and marches forward to us, that story crumbles. And with it, our sense of certainty. So the ice keeps its secrets. For now. But secrets don't last forever. Sooner or later, something cracks. And when it does, the world won't just see Antarctica differently. It'll see itself differently too. Before radar scans, before satellites, before treaties and expeditions, there were stories. Because when humans don't know what's at the edge of the map, we do what we always do, we make things up. And Antarctica has always been more myth than geography. The Greeks called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. A massive continent they believed had to exist to balance the northern world. They had no proof, but the idea stuck. For centuries, maps showed an enormous southern landmass, drawn with more imagination than evidence. A blank canvas for every fear and fantasy. Later, sailors spun their own tales. Harsh winds, endless ice, creatures that didn't belong anywhere else. Some swore they saw mountains of glass, or seas that boiled, or islands that vanished as you approached. When you spend months staring at an empty horizon, your mind fills in the gaps. And sometimes, the gaps are darker than reality. Then there's the legend of lost continents. Atlantis, Lemuria. Civilizations wiped from the earth, leaving only fragments in myths and suspiciously precise old maps. The connection to Antarctica is obvious. A land that once thrived, now buried beneath water or ice. A ghost continent, hiding in plain sight. Even the name Antarctica has a kind of irony. It literally means opposite of the north. Defined not by what it is, but by what it isn't. A place so strange, so unreachable, it could only be described as the shadow of somewhere else. Now, imagine yourself centuries ago, standing on the deck of a creaking wooden ship. The wind howls, the sea claws at the hull, and the compass spins as if it doesn't want you to be here. You stare south into the mist, into the cold, into nothing. And your mind whispers, maybe there's something out there. Something we're not meant to find. The myths never really went away. They just changed shape. In the 20th century, Antarctica became the setting for new legends. Secret Nazi bases, alien craft buried in the ice, lost cities frozen in time. Different storytellers, same old theme. Antarctica is never just Antarctica. It's always hiding something. And here's the funny thing. Myths often sound ridiculous, until they're not. Troy was a bedtime story until someone dug up its walls. Flood myths were dismissed until we found evidence of ancient deluges. When humans repeat a story long enough, there's usually a shard of truth at its core. So maybe Antarctica's myths aren't just fantasy. Maybe they're echoes of something we once knew and forgot. A memory buried as deeply as the continent itself. Of course, mainstream history shrugs this off. Myths are just stories, entertainment for people without science. But when you line them up, the maps, the legends, the whispers of lost lands, they start to look less like imagination and more like fractured recollections. Broken pieces of a puzzle we're not supposed to finish. And Antarctica? It's the perfect stage. Remote, inaccessible, silent. A blank page where every fear, every dream, every forgotten memory can be projected. Which makes you wonder, are we inventing the myths, or is the continent itself pushing them into our heads? Because the more you look south, the more the line between legend and history blurs. And somewhere out there, under the endless ice, maybe the truth is still waiting. Because no good mystery is complete without aliens, right? Atlantis, Nazis, secret treaties, they all eventually get upgraded to maybe it was extraterrestrials. And Antarctica is no exception. The theory goes something like this. If Earth were ever a pit stop for visitors from elsewhere, Antarctica would be the perfect hangar. Remote, empty, covered in ice thick enough to hide anything. You could park an entire fleet under there and no one would notice. Unless, of course, the satellites start getting nosy. And wouldn't you know it, there are stories. Whispers from Operation High Jump. American planes supposedly chased by flying discs darting out of the clouds. Later, reports of glowing lights over the horizon, objects tracked moving far faster than any human craft. Always dismissed, always denied. But they linger. Then there are the rumors of crash sites. Supposed anomalies under the ice that look suspiciously like saucer-shaped wreckage, frozen in time. Photos surface online, blurred, grainy, conveniently unexplained. Skeptics say it's just ice formations. Believers say ice doesn't form perfect disks. And you, staring at the picture at 2 a.m., can't quite decide which side feels less ridiculous. Of course, the alien theory isn't just about UFOs. Some claim Antarctica itself may have been a base. That ancient structures under the ice aren't human ruins at all, but something else. Built by hands, or claws, that weren't ours. Maybe that's why the place is locked down. Not to protect oil, or penguins, or science, but to keep humanity away from whatever sleeps beneath. Picture it, a vast cavern under the ice, warmed by geothermal heat. Not empty, but filled. Metallic walls, strange markings, technology humming softly after millennia of silence. You step inside, your breath echoing, and realize This was never built for humans. Now, let's be clear. There's no hard evidence for any of this. Just stories, rumors, blurry images, and the occasional pilot who swears he saw something impossible. But the absence of proof doesn't stop the imagination. If anything, it feeds it. Antarctica is the perfect canvas for alien theories because it's the one place on Earth we can't easily check for ourselves. And isn't it funny? Governments laugh at the idea of UFOs, yet they classify the files. Scientists roll their eyes at alien theories, yet their radar scans keep coming back with unusual anomalies. And every so often, a satellite image goes missing. If it's all nonsense, why the secrecy? Why the edits? Why the treaties that slam the door shut? Of course, maybe it's nothing. Maybe the lights in the sky were just weather. Maybe the saucers in the ice are just rocks. Maybe the structures are just mountains pretending to be pyramids. But then again, maybe not. And that's the hook, isn't it? Antarctica never confirms, it only teases. A continent of half-truths, where every blurry photo becomes a conspiracy, every strange shadow becomes a ship, every silence becomes a secret. So whether you believe in little green men, or just little green lies, Antarctica has plenty of room for both. And until someone lets us dig a mile through the ice, the alien theories aren't going anywhere. After all, the easiest way to hide the truth isn't in the stars. It's under our feet. Frozen. Waiting. Not every story about Antarctica comes from maps or satellites. Some come from people. Or at least from people who say they were there. These are the whistleblowers, the supposed insiders, the "I shouldn't be telling you this but" types. And their accounts range from strange to downright cinematic. One ex-naval officer claimed he saw massive caverns under the ice during classified missions. Warm pockets big enough to fit entire cities, lit by a strange glow. Another talked about structures, half buried, visible only when the ice melted just enough to reveal stone. Always stone. Always cut too neatly to be natural. Then there are the pilots. Stories of being ordered to turn away when their instruments picked up anomalies. Flights diverted without explanation. Areas marked no-go for reasons no one cared to explain. Some claim they saw disks rise from the ice, darting into the clouds faster than anything human. They reported it, and were told to forget it. Of course, the internet eats this stuff up. Forums filled with anonymous accounts, grainy photos, long threads where every blurry shadow is proof. Skeptics point out how easy it is to make things up when no one can verify them. But that's exactly why these claims stick. Antarctica is sealed off. The treaty keeps outsiders out. The ice keeps evidence buried. Who's going to check? And then the occasional leak slips through the cracks. A blurry radar image here. A suspiciously redacted report there. Not enough to prove anything, but just enough to raise eyebrows. Enough to keep the whispers alive. Imagine you're one of those insiders. You've seen something you shouldn't have. A glimpse of an entrance, a cavern, a shape under the ice. You go home, try to forget, but it gnaws at you. Eventually you talk. Quietly, anonymously, maybe even drunkenly. You say just enough for the story to escape into the wild. And once it's out, it spreads. That's the thing about Antarctica. It doesn't need proof. It just needs possibility. A few whispers, a couple of redacted documents, a shaky testimony. That's enough to keep the legend alive. Now, are all these whistleblowers reliable? Probably not. Memory plays tricks. Stories get embellished. Some people just want attention. But here's the uncomfortable part. Not all of them can be dismissed. Some were decorated officers, scientists, pilots with spotless careers. The kind of people you'd normally trust, unless what they're saying makes you uncomfortable. And that's the irony. We tell ourselves to trust the experts, right up until the experts tell us something we don't want to hear. Then they're labeled cranks, silenced, or simply ignored. Easier that way. Cleaner. Still, the whispers keep coming. Claims of deep tunnels carved into the ice. Of strange heat signatures that suggest something massive down there. Of entire regions classified, eyes only. And always the hint that what's really happening under Antarctica isn't science, it's secrecy. Maybe it's all fantasy. Maybe it's just lonely men staring too long at snowdrifts until the snow starts to look like pyramids. Or maybe, just maybe, they saw something real. Something their governments would rather keep under wraps. Because the one thing all these testimonies have in common is silence. Not evidence. Not proof. Silence. A wall of official denial so thick it makes the story sound more believable, not less. And in the end, you're left with a choice. Dismiss them all as nonsense, or accept that some people may have glimpsed a truth buried under 2 miles of ice. A truth that will never make it into textbooks or news reports. Only into whispers. Whispers that, once you hear them, you can't quite unhear. On paper, the Antarctic Treaty is a triumph of international cooperation. Signed in 1959, it basically says, no wars here, no ownership, no drilling, no nukes. Just science and penguins. Sounds wholesome. Uplifting even. Almost suspiciously so. Because think about it. When has humanity ever agreed to leave a place untouched? Well, gold? Minerals? Normally, we're elbowing each other out of the way to get the first shovel in. Yet somehow, the one continent rumored to hide secrets under miles of ice just happens to be the only one we've all agreed not to exploit. Convenient. The treaty has 56 member countries now, all sworn to keep Antarctica for peaceful purposes only. Which is noble, but also a little odd. Nations can't even agree on how to share fishing rights or Wi-Fi standards, but Antarctica? That's a unified, unanimous, hands-off. Almost like someone, somewhere wanted it locked down. Of course, the official story is simple. Protect the environment, preserve the wildlife, focus on science. And yes, that's important. Antarctica is fragile, extreme, and home to ecosystems you won't find anywhere else. But let's be honest, that's never stopped anyone before. We've drilled through coral reefs, burned rainforests, and stripped mountains bare. Suddenly we found our conscience at the bottom of the earth? Unlikely. Now, imagine yourself standing at one of the research bases. You're not a scientist. You're just visiting, maybe repairing equipment. And you notice the rules. Where you can go, where you can't. Entire zones marked off limits. Environmental reasons, they say. But when you ask why, the answers are vague. Shrugs, smiles, and quick subject changes. You start to wonder, what exactly is being protected here? The penguins, or the secrets? Some argue the treaty is really about keeping nations from stumbling across things they shouldn't. Ancient ruins. Plastic. Maybe even wreckage that doesn't belong to Earth. If you control access, you control the story. And the Antarctic Treaty is the perfect lock on that icy vault. Think about it. Decades of secrecy. No private expeditions allowed without layers of approval. Entire regions mapped but kept under wraps. And when curious explorers try to push boundaries, they're turned back. Always with a polite smile, always with an excuse about safety. It's the gentlest, friendliest cover-up in history. And here's the kicker, the treaty isn't temporary. It's renewable, extended, reinforced again and again, making sure Antarctica stays untouchable far into the future. Almost as if the ice is protecting something timeless, and the signatories know it. Of course, skeptics say this is paranoia, that it's really about environmentalism, not conspiracies. But the timing is suspicious. Signed during the Cold War, when the US and the Soviets trusted each other about as much as they trusted rabid wolves. Yet somehow, both agreed on this one thing. No military conflict. No weapons. No claiming land. If that doesn't raise your eyebrows, you're not paying attention. And when you peel it back further, you start to see the irony. The treaty was born not to protect Antarctica, but to protect us from Antarctica. To make sure we don't stumble into something buried in the ice, something that might change the narrative of history, or the balance of power. So when you hear about how Antarctica is just for science, take it with a glacier-sized grain of salt. Science may be happening, but so is something else. Something quiet. Something locked down. And maybe that's the real function of the treaty. Not to keep Antarctica pure, but to keep it hidden. In 1946, not long after World War II ended, the United States launched one of the largest expeditions ever sent to Antarctica. 13 ships, over 4,000 men, aircraft, helicopters, even submarines. Officially, it was called Operation High Jump. The mission? To train troops, test equipment, and practice survival in extreme conditions. That's the official story. But then the rumors start. Why send a military armada, fresh out of war, to the coldest, emptiest place on Earth? Why the urgency? Why the secrecy? And why, after planning for months, did the operation end abruptly after only a few weeks? The whispers say it wasn't just about training. That the U.S. Navy was really there to investigate or confront something under the ice. Some versions say they were hunting for remnants of Nazi bases. Others insist they encountered something not human at all. Strange craft darting through the sky. Weapons they couldn't match. And when they returned, it was in silence. Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, who led the mission, added fuel to the fire. In interviews afterward, he spoke cryptically about dangers coming from the polar regions. He warned of aircraft that could fly pole to pole at incredible speeds. His words were vague but chilling, and they've been dissected ever since. Now, the skeptics argue Byrd was just talking about the Cold War, about the threat of Soviet bombers flying over the poles. Nothing supernatural, nothing alien, just politics and paranoia. Maybe, but the timing is curious. Operation High Jump wrapped up months earlier than scheduled. Men injured, equipment lost. And the details? Classified. Always classified. Picture yourself as one of the sailors on that mission. You're expecting endless ice and boring drills. But instead, the orders come in: retreat. Pack up. We're leaving. No explanation, just a sudden pullback. You look out across the frozen horizon and wonder, what did we just run into? That's the heart of the legend. Not what's written in the reports, but what isn't. The gaps. The silences. The sudden changes that never quite add up. And once those rumors take root, they grow. Operation High Jump becomes the perfect blank slate for every theory. Nazis fleeing to Antarctic bunkers. Alien craft rising from hidden caverns. Secret battles fought in the white void, quickly erased from history. It sounds ridiculous, but also strangely fitting. Because Antarctica itself is ridiculous. A place too big, too empty, too unknown. Perfect for secrets. The truth is probably less cinematic. Maybe the Navy just underestimated how brutal Antarctica really is. Equipment froze. Men got injured. Logistics fell apart. But then again, the official explanations always leave room for doubt. And doubt is fertile ground. In the end, Operation High Jump sits in that gray space between history and legend. On paper, a training exercise. In whispers, a clash with something unimaginable. And Antarctica, silent as ever, offers no answers. Which leaves you with one unsettling thought. If they really did encounter something extraordinary buried under the ice or flying above it, would we ever be told? Spoiler alert, probably not. No discussion of Antarctica's mysteries is complete without the Nazis. Because apparently, if there's a conspiracy, they're always lurking in the background. The story starts with an expedition in 1938 to 39. Nazi Germany sent a ship, the Schwabenland, south to explore Antarctica. They mapped coastlines, dropped metal swastika markers, and claimed a chunk of land they called New Schwabenland. Officially, it was about securing whaling rights and showing off German ambition. Unofficially, that's where the speculation begins. Some say it wasn't just a scientific mission, that the Nazis were scouting locations for secret bases, carving tunnels into the ice, building bunkers, maybe even finding something that had already been there. By the time World War II ended, the whispers claimed part of the regime had simply melted away, straight into Antarctica. The myths get stranger. Entire fleets of U-boats supposedly vanished, heading south instead of surrendering. Some say they carried top scientists and experimental technology. Others imagine they carried something far stranger, relics, artifacts, or even alien assistance. And in these stories, the Antarctic ice becomes the Reich's final refuge. Now, most historians roll their eyes. The logistics alone make it absurd. Antarctica is lethal. You don't just set up a base there and start farming potatoes. But the myth refuses to die. Because every time evidence is lacking, secrecy fills the void. And the image of Nazis hiding under the ice, tinkering with advanced tech, is too cinematic for people to let go. Operation High Jump only fueled the fire. Remember how it ended abruptly? Conspiracy theorists tied it directly to those supposed Nazi bases. They claimed the US Navy wasn't testing gear. It was launching an assault. And it lost. The rumors say ships were damaged, men killed, all covered up. A shadow war at the bottom of the earth. Of course, none of this appears in official documents. No wreckage. No captured bases. Just silence. But silence is fertile soil. And so the myth keeps growing. Imagine yourself in 1946, a sailor hearing whispers that Hitler didn't die in a bunker. That he escaped, not to South America, but farther. To a hidden fortress in the ice, guarded by technology no one else understood. You'd laugh, but then you'd see the sudden end of High Jump. The secrecy. The strange comments from Admiral Byrd. And maybe, just maybe, you'd stop laughing. The Nazi Antarctic mythos isn't really about history. It's about unease. The war ended, but the fear lingered. The idea that evil didn't vanish, but retreated. That it found shelter in the one place no one could follow. And that maybe, just maybe, it was waiting. Modern conspiracy culture has taken it further. Some claim those bases still exist. Others tie them to UFO sightings, suggesting an alliance between Nazis and extraterrestrials. A bizarre marriage of history and science fiction, where Antarctica becomes both fortress and launchpad. Is any of it true? Almost certainly not. But it doesn't have to be. Because myths live where facts can't reach. And in the blinding white of Antarctica, facts are few and far between. So the legend survives. A shadow Reich, frozen in time, plotting in silence. A story that refuses to die, much like the villains it imagines beneath the ice. And here's the unsettling thought. Even if it's all fantasy, it still works. The secrecy, the treaties, the locked doors. They make the impossible sound just a little less impossible. Because when a continent is this empty, this silent, it's hard not to wonder who might be hiding there. The Cold War didn't stop at the equator. It stretched all the way down to the bottom of the earth, into the frozen silence of Antarctica. On paper, the continent was neutral. The Antarctic Treaty banned weapons, bases, and conflict. But treaties are just words. And during the Cold War, words didn't mean much. Behind the curtain, both the US and the Soviet Union had their eyes on the ice. But 2 reasons. First, geography. Antarctica sits at the bottom of the globe, perfectly placed for long-range flights and missile tracking. Whoever controlled the South could, in theory, watch the whole world from below. Second, mystery. Even back then, rumors swirled of strange readings under the ice. Caverns. Heat signatures. Places that didn't belong. And if there was even a chance that Antarctica hid something valuable, technological, natural, or otherwise, the superpowers weren't going to ignore it. So the continent filled with research stations. That's the official story. Science bases, collecting weather data, studying penguins. But the reality? Many of those stations doubled as listening posts, intelligence outposts, or test sites. Antarctica was a blank canvas where you could do things no one else could see. Picture yourself in the 1960s, stationed at a research base. You're told you're monitoring weather balloons. In reality, you're tracking signals bouncing across the ice. Your reports go back not to scientists but to military command. And when odd anomalies show up, strange heat, odd blips on radar, you're told not to ask questions. Just file it away. Keep quiet. There were whispers of secret flights. Planes testing the limits of endurance in polar airspace. Submarines probing beneath the ice shelves, mapping routes no one admitted existed. Even nuclear materials, allegedly brought south under the cover of scientific studies. Always denied, always unproven. But denial itself became suspicious. The Soviets were especially interested. Their Vostok station sat atop a massive subglacial lake, Lake Vostok, hidden beneath miles of ice. Officially, they drilled for science. Unofficially, some suggest they were searching for something else entirely. Natural resources, sure, but also anomalies. Things you don't put in official reports. Meanwhile, the Americans had their own shadows. Secretive operations to install monitoring equipment. Rumors of projects tied to Operation Deep Freeze. Some of the files remain classified even today. Which begs the question, if it was just penguins and snow, what's so sensitive about it 60 years later? The Cold War was about paranoia as much as power. If one side thought Antarctica held secrets, the other had to look too. And that paranoia turned the frozen desert into another chessboard. Of course, the public never saw this side. They got smiling scientists in parkas, holding weather balloons, feeding penguins. Meanwhile, behind locked doors, data flowed back to intelligence agencies. Antarctica became both playground and prison, a place where you could hide your projects, but also where the ice hid things from you. And then there are the persistent rumors that both sides found things they couldn't explain. Buried shapes, strange readings, maybe even encounters. If true, they never made it to the headlines. Just into whispers, leaks, and the occasional redacted document. By the time the Cold War ended, the stations remained. Many still do today. Still scientific, still smiling for the cameras, still quietly doing more than they admit. Because the Cold War might have ended, but secrecy never does. So next time you hear about Antarctica being protected for peace, remember, peace was never the priority. Not then, not now. The ice may be white, but the history painted across it is all shadows. Antarctica isn't just ice. Beneath that frozen skin lies something stranger, water. Entire lakes, sealed off for millions of years, trapped beneath miles of ice. Like time capsules from a world we've never seen. The most famous is Lake Vostok, discovered under 4 kilometers of ice near the Russian research station of the same name. It's massive, about the size of Lake Ontario. And here's the eerie part, it hasn't seen the open sky in maybe 15 million years. No sunlight, no air, cut off from the rest of Earth since long before humans showed up. Scientists drilled down, carefully, cautiously. They worried about contamination, both ways. Because whatever's been living in that sealed-off darkness has been evolving on its own for eons. Entire ecosystems could be down there. Or nothing at all. Both options are unsettling. When they finally sampled the water, they found microbes. Tiny life forms, alive in a place no one expected. That alone was enough to spark imagination. If life can thrive under Antarctica's ice, in cold, dark isolation, then where else might it survive? Europa? Enceladus? Mars? Suddenly, Antarctica looked less like a frozen desert and more like a training ground for alien biology. But the discoveries didn't stop there. Some reports hinted at unusual structures in the lakebed, others at heat signatures that didn't match expectations. A few whispers, never confirmed, always denied, suggested that what lies beneath isn't just microbial slime. Something bigger. Something complex. Now, picture this. You're a scientist drilling into Lake Vostok. The drill finally breaks through, pressure equalizes, and for a brief moment, water untouched for millions of years touches modern steel. You collect your sample, you bring it up, and under the microscope, you see movement. Not bacteria. Something larger. Something swimming. Something that shouldn't exist. Of course, the official story is simpler. Just microbes. Nothing more. But the secrecy around the research raises eyebrows. Data delayed. Papers redacted. Russia guarding its findings closely. If it was just a few bugs, why all the caution? And Lake Vostok isn't alone. Over 400 subglacial lakes have been identified. Some connected by hidden rivers, flowing in the dark. Imagine entire networks of water beneath the ice, warm enough to move, deep enough to hide anything. Cities. Wreckage. Ruins. Or just life, ancient, alien, adapted to a world of ice. It's unsettling to think that while the surface is lifeless, beneath it could be something entirely different. A mirror world, thriving in silence. And we've barely scratched it. Skeptics insist it's just science. And yes, it probably is. But history shows us that just science often turns into something stranger once the curtain is lifted. We thought nothing lived in the deep ocean. Then we found entire ecosystems. We thought caves were sterile. Then we found organisms that had been hiding there for millennia. Antarctica's lakes may be no different. Still, you can't shake the thought. What if those lakes are more than biological curiosities? What if they're vaults, holding not just microbes but memories? Not just ecosystems but evidence. Things buried deliberately, sealed under ice by either nature or something else. Because the deeper you go in Antarctica, the less it feels like you're exploring Earth. It feels like you're trespassing. When you picture Antarctica, you think of endless ice. Silent, cold, dead. But beneath that frozen skin? Fire. Lots of it. Antarctica isn't just the coldest place on Earth. It's also one of the most geologically active. Buried under the miles of ice are volcanoes. Dozens of them. Some dormant, some not so much. In 2017, researchers identified nearly 100 potential volcanoes beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet alone. And then there's Mount Erebus, towering over Ross Island. The southernmost active volcano on Earth, with a lava lake bubbling inside it, as if the continent is reminding us it's not as dead as it looks. Here's the unsettling part. Volcanoes under ice don't behave like volcanoes on land. When they erupt, the heat doesn't just rise into the air. It melts the ice above, creating massive subglacial floods. Water tunnels. Caverns. Pathways that shouldn't exist. And if you're wondering how rumors of hidden bases and ancient cities survive, lava-heated caves are a pretty convenient hiding place. Scientists have even found vast cave systems formed this way. Warm, humid, big enough to walk through in just a jacket. Not freezing but livable. Imagine it, stepping out of the Antarctic blizzard into a cavern lit with eerie light, dripping with steam, walls echoing like a cathedral. You could disappear in there. People. Bases. Maybe something else. Now, of course, geologists explain all this neatly. Volcanic heat shapes the ice, creates meltwater, affects glaciers. All very normal. But when you combine volcanoes with the continent's already bizarre subglacial lakes and rivers, the picture starts to look less like empty wasteland and more like Swiss cheese with secrets. Cavities everywhere. Pathways no one can map. Shadows no one can reach. Picture yourself on a research mission. You're drilling ice cores, measuring seismic activity, bored out of your mind. Then your instruments spike. Heat signatures rising from deep below. Not one, not two, dozens. Entire networks of fire under the ice. And suddenly you realize the continent you thought was lifeless is alive. Breathing. Waiting. And this raises another uncomfortable thought. What if some of those anomalies spotted on radar, those suspicious heat signatures, aren't all geological? What if some of them are something else, hiding in the same warmth? Volcanoes create caves, caves create shelter, and shelter. Well, that's where you hide things you don't want found. Skeptics shrug. It's just Earth being weird. But here's the irony. Some of the most mysterious landscapes on the planet are right here, buried under Antarctica's frozen lid. If you wanted to hide a civilization, an artifact, or even an entire species, this is where you do it. Not on the surface, beneath the ice, beside the fire. Volcanoes make Antarctica unstable, unpredictable. At any moment, an eruption could reshape the land, melt glaciers, or unleash floods under the ice. Which means that even if secrets have been buried for millennia, they won't stay buried forever. Fire doesn't keep secrets. It exposes them. So the next time someone tells you Antarctica is just an icy wasteland, remind them, beneath the silence, the continent is burning. And one day, that fire might reveal what the ice has been hiding. Antarctica doesn't just confuse explorers on the ground. It messes with instruments, too. Compasses go haywire. Magnetic readings fluctuate. Signals drop out without warning. It's as if the continent itself doesn't want to be measured. One of the strangest cases lies beneath Wilkes Land, in East Antarctica. In 2006, Satellites detected a massive magnetic anomaly buried deep under the ice. Think of it like a scar on Earth's skin, a region where the magnetic field bends in ways it shouldn't. And it's not small. This thing spans over 150 miles across. Scientists, naturally, gave a neat explanation. It might be the remnants of an asteroid impact, like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. A crater buried beneath the ice, distorting the field. Plausible. Boring. But other interpretations were less tidy. Some suggested the anomaly could be artificial. A structure. A base. Something deliberately buried. Because here's the thing, magnetic anomalies can come from many sources. Or deposits. Craters. Metal. Large, unnatural concentrations of it. And what kind of metal formation hides under 2 miles of ice? Not the kind you stumble across by accident. Picture yourself as part of a survey team, flying instruments over the Antarctic expanse. For hours, your readings are normal. Flat lines, predictable blips. Then, suddenly, the needle spikes. A distortion, strong and deliberate, like someone flipping a switch under the ice. You circle back. The reading holds. It's not noise. They're pulsing steady. But when you radio it in, your supervisor just says, log it and move on. Translation, don't ask questions. Of course, scientists insist these anomalies are natural. But the secrecy around some of the findings is what sparks suspicion. Files withheld. Coordinates blurred. Explanations vague. And in a place like Antarctica, where almost no one can double-check for themselves, vague starts to feel deliberate. The Wilkes Land anomaly isn't the only one. Other regions, too, show strange distortions. Some are brushed off as instrument error. Others never make it past the initial report. But pilots and researchers tell stories. Compasses spinning, navigation systems refusing to lock, radios cutting in and out for no reason. If you were building something under the ice, something you wanted to keep hidden, magnetic interference would be a convenient side effect. Or maybe not a side effect at all. Maybe it's the defense. A natural cloaking device, warning outsiders to keep away. Skeptics laugh it off. To them, it's just geology being geology. The Earth is messy after all. But it's hard not to notice the pattern. The more anomalies found, the more theories rise. Lost civilizations. Secret installations. Even suggestions that Antarctica's anomalies are signals, not scars. Pulses, broadcasts, coming from deep within. It sounds absurd. Until you realize that every breakthrough in history sounded absurd, until it didn't. So the next time someone says Antarctica is empty, remember the instruments don't agree. Something under the ice is bending fields, scrambling compasses, distorting readings. Whether it's nature or something else, one thing is certain, Antarctica isn't silent. It hums. Every frozen desert seems to collect myths, but Antarctica is different. Its legends refuse to die. No matter how many scientists insist it's just ice and rock, whispers of something older, something human, keep bubbling up through the frost. It starts with maps. Not just the Piri Reis map, but others too, the Orontius Phineas, the Bwatch map. Centuries-old charts that appear to outline Antarctica's coastline without ice. As if someone mapped the continent before it froze, tens of thousands of years ago. Mainstream historians argue it's coincidence or misdrawn coastlines of South America. That's the safe explanation. But the resemblance is uncanny enough to keep conspiracy theories alive. And if ancient people somehow knew Antarctica, the questions get bigger. Who were they? How did they cross oceans? And why does their knowledge vanish from history, only to reappear in fragments that don't make sense? Some say the answer is simple. Antarctica wasn't always buried in ice. There was a time, long ago, when the continent was green, temperate, even lush. Fossilized forests found under the ice support that claim. Which makes the next leap tempting. If forests grew there, maybe people lived there too. Picture it, vast river valleys, rolling plains, an isolated continent thriving before the ice came. Civilizations rise, build, collapse. Their ruins buried, sealed away under glaciers that creep over everything. For us, it's an empty wasteland. For them, it could have been home. Of course, the myths grow wilder. Tales of pyramids peeking through the snow. Photos of suspiciously angular mountains that look less like geology and more like architecture. Images that circle the internet endlessly debated. Just rocks versus lost temples. No one agrees, and that's the point. The ambiguity feeds the myth. Then there are the stories of tunnels and caverns, stretching for miles, supposedly carved by hands long gone. Add in the volcanic caves and subglacial lakes we know exist, and suddenly, it doesn't sound impossible. Just improbable. Which, in Antarctica, is good enough. Imagine walking across a windswept ridge. Snow blinds your vision, ice crunches underfoot, everything looks the same. Then the fog clears, and in the distance, something rises from the white. A triangular peak, too sharp, too symmetrical. Your first thought isn't mountain. It's monument. And then you remember you're standing on a continent where no one should have built anything. Skeptics roll their eyes. They remind us of pareidolia, the human brain seeing patterns where none exist. A pyramid-shaped mountain is just erosion, not evidence of ancient masons. But if you squint at the photographs, if you let your imagination wander, it's easy to see why people believe otherwise. The whispers never stop because they scratch an itch. The idea that Antarctica hides an ancient civilization speaks to something deep in us. The fear that history is incomplete, that entire chapters are missing. And maybe the truth isn't, there was nothing here, but there was something and we lost it. Whether it's misinterpreted maps, odd-shaped peaks, or fossils of temperate forests, the result is the same. Antarctica feels less like a barren desert and more like a locked vault. A place holding secrets older than memory, sealed under 2 miles of ice. And the cruel irony? If there were ruins, cities, or civilizations, we may never reach them. By the time we dig that deep, the continent may have melted on its own. The ice might keep its secrets, only to wash them into the sea when it finally disappears. Until then, the myths remain. Because myths are patient. They can outlast glaciers. If you've spent more than 5 minutes on the internet, you've seen it. The claim that Antarctica is more than ice, more than forgotten maps, more than volcanic caves. According to some, it's a parking lot for extraterrestrials. Sounds ridiculous, right? But here's the catch. Every great conspiracy needs space aliens. Egypt has them. South America has them. Why not Antarctica, the most inaccessible place on Earth? The theories vary. Some say aliens crashed here long ago, their ships now frozen beneath the ice. Others argue they chose Antarctica deliberately, using the vast caverns and subglacial lakes as bases. The continent's remoteness makes it a perfect hiding spot. After all, who's going to check? The penguins? Then there are the whispers about collaborations. Claims that during the Cold War, governments made contact with something under the ice and decided not to tell anyone. Instead, they kept it secret, using research stations as cover for something far stranger. Let's slow down though. Where do these ideas come from? Some start with radar anomalies, strange shapes, massive cavities under the ice, heat signatures too big to be natural. A few even say UFOs have been spotted around the continent, darting across the horizon, vanishing into storms. Grainy footage, shaky cameras, classic UFO material. The more imaginative theories tie Antarctica to alien origin stories. Ancient civilizations supposedly learned from sky visitors who landed in the south. When the ice came, those bases were buried. The knowledge was lost, except for scraps preserved in myth and suspicious maps. That's the story anyway. Picture yourself standing on the Antarctic plateau. The wind howls, the air stings your lungs, everything is white and endless. Then, out of the blizzard, a shadow streaks overhead. Not a plane. Not a bird. Something else. It vanishes into the clouds before you can even process it. Later, you tell your team and they laugh. But you can't shake the feeling. It wasn't nothing. Of course, skeptics point out the obvious. Antarctica is a magnet for UFO stories because no one can prove or disprove them. It's remote, uninhabited, and visually weird. Any strange cloud, light, or mountain shape can be spun into evidence. And yet, the stories keep piling up. There's even the infamous tale of Admiral Richard Byrd, supposedly writing in his diary about encounters with advanced beings during Operation High Jump. The catch? That diary's authenticity is dubious at best, fabricated at worst. But once the seed is planted, it grows. People want to believe. And maybe that's the real reason aliens always enter the conversation. Not because they're there, but because Antarctica feels alien already. The landscape is so hostile, so otherworldly, that it doesn't take much imagination to see it as something from beyond Earth. Step onto the ice sheet and you might as well be on Mars. The cold is the same. The emptiness is the same. The silence is the same. So, are there alien bases beneath the Antarctic ice? Probably not. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If there were, it would look exactly like it does now. Empty. Denied. Shrugged off as fantasy. Which leaves you with the unsettling thought. The line between ridiculous and possible gets thinner the deeper you go into the ice. On paper, Antarctica is the most peaceful place on Earth. No weapons. No war. Just scientists in parkas, studying ice cores and feeding penguins. At least, that's what the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 promised. But let's be honest. When has any treaty ever worked exactly as advertised? The treaty was signed by 12 countries at the height of the Cold War, the United States, the Soviet Union, and 10 others. A rare moment of cooperation in a world otherwise split by paranoia. They agreed to keep Antarctica demilitarized, dedicated only to science, and open for all to study. Sounds noble. Almost utopian. But scratch the surface and the picture gets messy. The treaty forbids military activity, except, of course, for logistical support. Translation: you can fly military planes, sail military ships, build bases, and post personnel as long as you say it's helping scientists. Convenient loophole. It also allows inspections, meaning any country can walk into another station and see what they're doing. In theory, this keeps everyone honest. In practice, inspections are rare and stations are remote. If someone wanted to hide something, Antarctica is the easiest place in the world to do it. No neighbors. No journalists. No oversight. Just endless ice. Now, think about this. Countries that can't agree on anything else somehow agreed to share Antarctica. No wars, no borders, no claims. Just peace. Does that sound like geopolitics to you? Or does it sound like maybe, just maybe, everyone knows there's something under the ice worth keeping quiet about? Imagine you're in 1959, a diplomat sitting at the table. You've just come through a world war, you're neck deep in nuclear standoffs, and suddenly every rival agrees to freeze their claims on the most resource-rich continent on Earth. Minerals. All off limits. Voluntarily. If that doesn't raise eyebrows, nothing will. Some argue the treaty is less about peace and more about control. A way for powerful nations to lock the door on Antarctica, keeping smaller countries, and the public, from digging too deep. You can come study snowflakes, sure. But don't expect to drill for oil, mine for metals, or poke around suspicious anomalies. That's off the table. And the secrecy continues. Many documents about Antarctic expeditions remain classified. Military files on Operation High Jump, Operation Deep Freeze, Soviet drilling projects, still sealed. If it's all innocent science, why the locked drawers? Of course, defenders insist the treaty is exactly what it says it is. A rare example of humans choosing peace over profit. And maybe that's true. Maybe. But even if it is, the effect is the same. Antarctica is kept off limits, shielded by international law, untouchable by normal exploration. Which makes it the perfect place to bury secrets. Picture yourself arriving at an Antarctic station as part of an inspection team. You're shown smiling scientists, lab equipment, neat reports on weather data. Everything looks clean. Normal. Then you're politely told the tour is over. The locked doors in the back? Not for you. The tunnels leading deeper under the ice? Off limits. You sign the paperwork, smile for the photo, and fly home. Did you inspect anything? Or just see what they wanted you to see? That's the genius of the Antarctic Treaty. It presents Antarctica as a symbol of peace, while making sure no one ever digs too deep literally or figuratively. Peace on the surface, shadows underneath. So the question isn't whether the treaty works. It's whether it works a little too well. Officially, Antarctica is a frozen science lab. Unspoiled, untouched, protected. But let's not kid ourselves. Underneath that noble rhetoric lies something much more familiar: resources. Antarctica is a geological goldmine, literally. Beneath the ice lie vast deposits of coal, oil, natural gas, iron or copper, gold, even uranium. A treasure chest locked under a frozen lid. For now, the Antarctic Treaty bans mining. It's all about protecting the environment, they say. Which sounds nice, especially when you consider humanity's track record of bulldozing everything it touches. But do you really think the world's major powers agreed to leave billions, maybe trillions, of dollars in minerals untouched forever? They're just waiting. Here's how it works. The treaty keeps Antarctica off limits until 2048, when the environmental protocols can be reviewed. That's less than 3 decades away. And countries are already circling like sharks. China, Russia, the US, and others have been quietly increasing their scientific presence. More bases, more research stations, more people collecting ice samples. Convenient cover for staking claims before the door cracks open. Imagine you're working at a drilling site in the middle of nowhere. Officially, you're collecting climate data. In reality, you're punching cores deep into the bedrock, sending the samples back home. Your report mentions ice layers, but the data packet hidden in the crate? Mineral composition. Resource maps. Knowledge is power, and in Antarctica, it's literally buried treasure. And the numbers are staggering. Some estimates suggest Antarctica could hold 200 billion barrels of oil. Enough to reshape global markets overnight. Not to mention coal reserves larger than any on Earth. And fresh water. The ice sheet alone locks up about 70% of the world's supply. Forget gold. In a century of climate crises, fresh water may be the most valuable resource of all. So why the secrecy? Why the insistence on peaceful science only? Because if the world admitted how much wealth was frozen under the ice, no treaty would survive. Every nation would scramble for a peace. And the fragile balance, the illusion of Antarctica as a sanctuary, would collapse overnight. Of course, defenders argue the environment must come first. Drilling under the ice would devastate ecosystems. But if history shows us anything, it's this. When push comes to shove, resources win. The Amazon, the Arctic, the deep sea, all once considered too precious to touch. Now all exploited. Antarctica is just waiting its turn. Picture yourself in 2050. The treaty is up for review. Countries argue over climate policy, over food shortages, over energy. Then someone clears their throat and points to Antarctica. Billions of barrels of oil. Mountains of coal. Minerals worth fighting for. Suddenly, the peaceful science lab looks like the last great frontier of extraction. And maybe, just maybe, all this talk of protecting Antarctica is less about saving penguins and more about buying time. Time to map the land beneath the ice. Time to mark the richest veins of ore. Time to plan how to divide the spoils once the paperwork changes. The Antarctic Treaty paints a picture of global unity. But beneath the snow, the real story is greed on ice. Waiting. Every great conspiracy story has a turning point, and in Antarctica, it's Operation High Jump. The year was 1946. World War II had just ended. The US launched one of the largest expeditions in Antarctic history, 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and over 4,700 personnel. On paper, it was a training mission. A few months of practicing polar survival, testing equipment, and mapping terrain. That's the official story. But people don't usually send an entire naval task force just to look at penguins. The operation was led by Admiral Richard Byrd, a seasoned polar explorer. His task: establish a US presence, gather data, and, allegedly, prepare for future bases. It was supposed to last 6 to 8 months. Instead, it ended abruptly after just a few weeks. Ships damaged. Aircraft lost. Casualties reported. Officially, accidents. Unofficially, something else. Whispers began almost immediately. Some claimed Byrd encountered enemy resistance, remnants of the Nazis, hiding in secret bases under the ice. Others said the task force ran into unknown aircraft, faster and more agile than anything the US had at the time. The kind of story that would quietly mutate into UFO legends later on. Picture yourself as a sailor on one of those ships. Endless ice stretching to the horizon. The cold gnaws at your bones. Suddenly your radar pings. Objects incoming, moving at impossible speeds. You scramble to stations, heart pounding. The sky above fills with shadows. Minutes later, chaos. Planes down. Orders shouted. Then silence. And afterward? A report filed under classified. Of course, the Navy downplayed everything. They blamed weather, mechanical failures, bad luck. But then came Byrd's own strange statements. In a South American newspaper, he reportedly warned that the US should prepare for the possibility of attacks from flying objects that could travel from pole to pole at incredible speeds. Later dismissed as a misquote. Convenient, isn't it? Operation High Jump's sudden end and the secrecy surrounding it fueled decades of speculation. If it was just training, why so many ships? Why the abrupt retreat? Why the classified reports? Skeptics insist the expedition was routine, nothing more. But the scale doesn't match the excuse. Some tie it to Nazi myths, the idea that Germany had scouted Antarctica before and set up bases. Operation High Jump, they argue, was less about science and more about making sure no one else controlled the ice. Others lean into the UFO angle, claiming Byrd's warnings were quietly buried because they didn't fit the post-war narrative. And then there's the simplest theory: the US was testing equipment for the coming Cold War. Antarctica was remote, harsh, and perfect for experimenting. But if that's true, why bury so much of the mission under layers of classification? That's the trouble with High Jump. The more you explain it, the less sense it makes. It's either the most overblown training mission in history, or the tip of something much stranger. Officially, it was about logistics. Unofficially, it remains the foundation for every Antarctic conspiracy since. Whenever people whisper about UFOs under the ice, lost civilizations, or secret military projects, they point back here. To 1946. To Byrd. To the expedition that ended too soon and left too many questions. And the silence from official sources doesn't help. Because silence breeds stories. And in Antarctica, stories are harder to bury than ships in ice. Antarctica is the perfect place to disappear. Too big to patrol, too cold to survive, too empty to question. Which is why stories of hidden bases and lost expeditions cling to it like frostbite that won't heal. The most persistent are the Nazi base myths. According to legend, the Germans scouted Antarctica in the late 1930s, carving out a territory they named Neuschwabenland. Some say they built bunkers, stocked supplies, even tunneled into volcanic caves warmed from below. When World War II ended, the story goes, some fled there and never came back out. Do historians scoff at this? Absolutely. They point out that the expedition was small, more about whaling rights than world domination. But that hasn't stopped the rumors. Every unusual structure on the ice, every abandoned station, gets folded back into the myth. See? Proof. And then there are the explorers who vanished. Antarctica has swallowed entire expeditions, leaving only fragments behind. Wrecked ships trapped in ice. Camps abandoned mid-supply run. Journals that end mid-sentence. In a land where storms can erase footprints in seconds, vanishing isn't hard. But when people go missing in the most mysterious place on Earth, their ghosts don't stay quiet. Picture yourself trudging through a whiteout. Wind screaming, snow blinding, the horizon gone. Then, faintly in the distance, you see a structure. Angular, dark against the endless white. Relief surges, shelter. But when you push closer, the shape dissolves into the storm. Was it a mirage? Or something the ice didn't want you to reach? Abandoned stations at the continent too, each one a magnet for stories. Broken down huts, creaking in the wind, filled with relics of long-gone crews. Rusting fuel drums, torn sleeping bags, half-buried crates. Sometimes, nothing more than a foundation swallowed by snow. To outsiders, it's just decay. To storytellers, it's evidence. Proof that people were hiding things, doing things, that never made it into the official records. The Cold War added more layers. Both the US and the Soviets built research bases that looked suspiciously fortified. And when satellites spotted anomalies, long tunnels, large cavities, explanations were scarce. Could they be natural? Sure. But natural has always been the polite word for don't ask. Every hidden base theory ends the same way, with silence. Governments deny, historians wave it off, scientists roll their eyes. But the myths won't die because Antarctica itself feeds them. It's too vast, too empty, too perfect a hiding place. If you wanted to erase something from the map, an outpost, a secret project, a lost civilization, where better to bury it than under 2 miles of ice. Even the lost expeditions blur fact and folklore. Some were real, doomed by poor planning or bad luck. Others, less certain. Tales of explorers who stumbled into caverns, or who saw lights in the sky, or who sent one last cryptic radio before vanishing. None confirmed, none disproven. Antarctica doesn't care about closure. So we're left with a continent that hides as much as it reveals. Bases that may or may not exist. Expeditions that may or may not have returned. Evidence that always seems just out of reach, buried deeper than anyone can dig. And maybe that's the point. Antarctica doesn't need to prove anything. It just waits, quietly swallowing secrets, while the rest of us argue over whether the stories are real. Because in the end, hidden bases and lost expeditions are the same thing, reminders that the ice is bigger than us. It decides what gets remembered and what gets erased. You've made it this far. 30 sections deep, wandering through ice, myths, maps, and secrets. And here we are, standing at the edge of the white abyss, Antarctica itself. The last frontier. The one place on Earth that still feels untouchable. Or at least, that's what they'd like you to believe. Antarctica is a paradox. Empty, yet full. Dead, yet alive. Nothing but ice, and yet everything beneath it. Beneath those miles of frozen layers lie mountains the size of the Alps. Lakes sealed off for millions of years. Rivers flowing in darkness, carrying who knows what in their currents. Entire ecosystems we've never seen. And if the ice hides life, it might also hide history. Imagine entire landscapes preserved like insects in amber. Ancient forests, sealed civilizations, maybe even ruins, if you're the imaginative type. The continent is a vault, and like any vault, the question isn't if it contains secrets, but how long they can stay locked. You stand on the ice, breath freezing in the air. Around you silence. Not the calm, peaceful kind. The heavy, suffocating silence of a place that doesn't need you. Antarctica doesn't care about your curiosity. Doesn't care about treaties, flags, or science. It simply waits. Patient, indifferent. And yet, humans can't help themselves. We're already digging. Already drilling. Already mapping every shadow and crevice, not because we love knowledge, but because we love control. The world pretends Antarctica is about science, but the truth is simpler. Nobody leaves 2 miles of ice sitting over a mountain of resources without a plan. The treaty is just a pause button. One day, someone will press play. And when they do, the ice will start giving up its secrets. Maybe it's just minerals and water. Maybe it's more. Maybe it's something we're not ready for. Something that survived in the dark far longer than we've been alive. You can laugh it off. Call it UFOs, lost civilizations, Nazi bases, the usual conspiracy cocktail. But even the skeptics admit, Antarctica is the least understood continent on Earth. 98% of it is buried, hidden, unreachable. We've mapped Mars more thoroughly than the ground beneath our own South Pole. That should bother you, because the real secret isn't what's under the ice. It's how little we know. For all our satellites, all our scans, we're still mostly blind. And what we can't see, we invent stories about. Stories that sometimes sound ridiculous, and sometimes So here's where we leave you, standing in the freezing dark, staring at an endless horizon of white. Somewhere under your boots could be oil, gold, fossils, forests, or nothing at all. Maybe you're treading on the roof of an ancient city. Maybe just on 2 miles of frozen water. Either way, the ice isn't talking. Not yet. Antarctica is patient. Humans are not. That's why one day the silence will break. And when it does, the last frontier may turn out to be less empty and far stranger than we ever imagined. Until then, Antarctica remains what it has always been, a mirror. A place where we project our fears, our greed, and our stories. A place that gives nothing back except cold. And the cold, as you've probably noticed, doesn't care.